This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast.
I'm Ethan Nash, one of your co-hosts, and I have with me today Mr. Michael Nash.
Hey.
Excited to be here with you all again today.
So we are speaking about psychological safety last podcast, and we're going to pick it up again today. We have been talking about why it's important for groups, for work groups. We've been talking about some of the roadblocks to psychological safety. Let's just, to recap, maybe start with Ethan. Let's get the definition going here again. Psychological safety. How do we define that?
Just to keep it simple, I'm just going to use the definition put forward by Amy Edmondson, who, as I shared last episode, was really the researcher who put the psychological safety concept on the mainstream map and, has spent her whole career researching it and studying it. Her definition of psychological safety is the belief that while in a particular group of people, you have the freedom to speak out, make mistakes, disagree, and be authentic without fear of being rejected, embarrassed, or punished.
There's some deep stuff in there. And we've spoken about why this matters so much and some of the results when we have this in a team and when we don't. We talked in our last episode about some of the roadblocks to psychological safety, and we narrowed it down to 3 of them, 2 of which we covered. Let me mention the first one, transference. And this is the idea that we, in any given relationship, whether it's with a single other person or whether it's in a group, our level of psychological safety that we are personally experiencing there is not only a result of what happens in that group, but it's also at what's happened in my life before this, right? Before I got here, meaning I already have stories in my heart, in my head, in my guts, right? About trust, right? Is it safe to trust people? Is it possible to restore trust if trust gets broken, right? These are stories that I bring with me based on all the experiences I've had in my past with other people. My wounds, my really healthy relationships, et cetera. I bring those with me into the present situation.
We all are starting from different points with, our sense of safety. And I know that, for some, the sense of your safety isn't always, conscious, right? It could be a subconscious feeling or sense going in that you're not necessarily aware of until you start maybe investigating that a little bit.
And then the second one, Ethan, we moved into the second thing that can either be a roadblock or a contributing factor to psychological safety.
All right, which is team dynamics, your sense of psychological safety, right? Your personal level of psychological safety is, what you experience in yourself, right? The transference you're bringing, and then what you experience in this particular group of people that you're working with. And which that's what we're talking about when we say the team dynamics, right? Are you generally getting messages that it's safe to show up as you, that it's safe to make mistakes, or the opposite, right?
Yep. You're in a group, you're in a relationship, and you discover because of the way people are behaving that it's safe to admit a mistake, or it's safe to show up and, be yourself and not have to hide, and you discover that by the reactions that you get from others. I think we had a really good discussion about that in the last episode about a lot of specific behaviors that we can be engaging in and avoiding so that we can help contribute to that psychological safety in a relationship or in a group.
Exactly. Well, I think that's a fair recap of last episode. Go back and listen to that one first if you can. But that leads us to the conversation that we're going to have today.
So the first two potential roadblocks to psychological safety is transference. Number two, team dynamics. Number three, and where we're going to head today, is what we call the power differential. And the power differential is, if you've been with us for a while, it's not a new concept. We have episodes about the power differential, but it is clearly one of the key, I'm going to call it roadblock to psychological safety in the workplace. And we're specifically talking about the workplace right now because that's really where the power differential shows up. I think maybe, Ethan, we should just a little review on what the power differential actually is. It's based on a few things, right? Number one, your boss actually has power over you. And using the word power like that kind of can make people feel a little awkward, but it is true. Meaning, if I'm your boss, I have control of things that you don't have control of that impact you. Ethan, what are off the top of your head, what are some of those areas where a boss would have power or control over the people that they supervise?
Theoretically, they could have control over your work schedule. Basically, that translates to control about how you spend your time.
Yeah, you control over what you do during that time, your tasks.
And then, of course, there's kind of the tangibles, right? There's control over if you get a raise, if you get a promotion, if you have get a demotion, at some level, they're probably going to be responsible for any type of performance review, or at least partially responsible for that.
Well, yeah, and that one, the review, it like you said, it dovetails into tangibles, right? But just being, sitting in front of another adult being told what you're doing well and not, that's frightening. And that's power, right? I mean, that's a weird situation to be in. There's, your reputation at work. There's opportunities for training. So many things, right? So bottom line is this person who I work for has all this control. And here's the bottom line, right? When I'm in a relationship with somebody who has a lot of control over me, I'm going to do whatever I can internally and externally to keep myself safe, right? And this is why we're getting closer to this issue, this concept of psychological safety. By the nature of being in a relationship with someone who has power over me, my default mode is going to be wondering if I'm safe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are wired as human beings to keep ourselves safe from threats, right? And so when someone has power over us, for one, we tend not to like that as human beings, another human being having power over us. But if they do, our tendency is to lean towards keeping ourselves safe.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And how might that, I'm glad you brought that up. How might that look, right? So you are working for somebody and for whatever reason, you're questioning your psychological safety. You don't have a lot of it right now with this person. And that might be transference, right? Your past experiences. It might be because that person has already proven to be a little unpredictable or a little angry or whatever it is, right? So what do you do to keep yourself safe? What does a human being do at that point to keep themselves safe?
Well, for one, I'm probably going to hedge what I'm saying, right? I might not necessarily share opinions that could be unpopular or that my boss would disagree with because they might think less of me for that, or that's my perception. Or you also might not admit mistakes or not show mistakes because you're afraid that could, harm you and your career here. Right. And so, you're going to keep yourself safe. You're going to say what you think that they want to hear. You're going to hide the mistakes. And ultimately, that's all in the vein of keeping yourself safe.
Those are really huge things. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I guess I want to spend a little more time on this, right? The repercussions of being in a situation where you don't feel psychologically safe with your boss, right? What that leads to. You've mentioned two of the biggest, most important ones, again, not speaking up about any number of things, not sharing your ideas, not sharing your feedback, and then not admitting your mistakes. We can see where that could lead. We're talking disaster. I remember one study from back when I was working with a couple hospitals, and this was now 15 years ago. I remember what they discovered was that what they called negative patient outcomes, which was their euphemism for patients dying, that one of the number one reasons for these unfortunate tragic situations were nurses not speaking up when they saw something because of the way they were treated by the physicians, by the doctors, when they would speak up and when they would give feedback. We literally had people dying because of a lack of psychological safety.
Yeah, and I've read those studies, and they've been actually repeated many times, and not only in just a hospital setting. I've heard an engineer say to me before, yeah, the equivalent of negative patient outcomes in the tech world is shipping the product that nobody wants to buy. Right. And I thought that was hilarious, but also true, right? People aren't necessarily speaking up either to their peers or in this case, their manager about where they thought we might be going wrong on this project. And so all of a sudden, everybody's smiling and nodding all the way along to the point that they're done with that product. And it's a failure. And that costs teams, countless wasted time. It can even cost an organization its ultimate success.
And if you go back later and debrief some of those situations, people will say, oh, I saw the problem, right? I could totally predict that was going to happen, right? Well, then why didn't you say anything? The answer often comes back to some version of exactly what we're talking about right here. It wasn't safe to do so.
And so we're talking a little bit about kind of, the negative consequences or outcomes when people are not psychologically safe. And one of the main factors being when someone has power over you and they're not intentionally working hard to not eliminate that power differential, but at least not to exaggerate it.
Let's work on mitigating it, because, we're talking about some pretty severe repercussions when I don't feel safe with the person that supervises me. We're again, not admitting mistakes, not pointing out errors, not giving feedback. We all the way to just kind of, let's go back to fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? Those are 4 of our sort of instinctual, evolutionary created defense mechanisms and ways that we survive when our sympathetic nervous system kicks in, right? So flight could look like what? It could look like just not showing up, not using the open door policy, not taking on projects, kind of disappearing.
Yeah, I think it could also just be generally just staying quiet. I mean, you're not physically flying from the situation, but I mean, that could also be the freeze mechanism right there. Like I'm just not going to say anything, but as long as I don't say anything, I can't say anything wrong. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting because freeze, there's a physical thing that happens when humans go through trauma, but when an animal is being hunted, specifically, like a deer or an animal that doesn't have the fangs and the claws, their bodies are geared up to just literally freeze and tear. The terror actually creates the freezing. And, evolutionary wise and sort of adaptability wise, that's great. When the deer freezes in the woods, it kind of disappears. When the employee freezes, right, out of just unpredictability and fear, and I don't trust my boss, and my boss doesn't have my back, and he or she's going to be mean to me or whatever. Freeze can look like just not being productive, not really trying, abdicating any ability or any sense of responsibility to contribute. Right? You just kind of fade into the woodwork.
It leads to a lack of engagement at the end of the day. Right? Yep. People are not going to be engaged if they don't feel safe with their manager or on their work team.
Yep, that's exactly right. And then there's fight. How might that look? You got a power differential issue. You don't have psychological safety with your boss. You move into fight mode. But what might that look like in the workplace?
I mean, it could just look like a lot of kind of infighting and arguing, or like I'm going to challenge everything you say because I don't feel safe here, right? And I feel like I am in a state of fear. And so I'm just going to be maybe ornery or push back on everything without even like realizing if I agree with this or not. I mean, I've certainly seen that before and experienced it before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that leads to a vicious cycle of now the employees kind of pushing back, and the manager now just doubles down on their, power trip or their, being severe or whatever it is, right? Which just exacerbates the whole thing. And then there's fawn, which is that 4th kind of trauma response way that we keep ourselves safe, which is that tendency to, for lack of a better phrase, just to suck up and, kiss butt. And I'm just going to be I'm going to be so sweet and nice. And I'm going to nod and smile at everything you say. And I'm going to be so easy for you to manage. I'm never going to push back.
Yeah. So that's kind of the 4 F words, centered around fear. Again, kind of bring us back, right? The power differential, right? The power you have as a leader over your people can be used for good or it can be used for evil, right? At its best, it's used in a way to build psychological safety, build trust, build respect with people. And at its worst, it tears your team down, right? And ultimately it hurts the performance of that group.
It really does. And just in a moment, of course, we want to get into some things then, that managers can do to mitigate this and to build psychological safety. But back to a point we made in the last episode, it takes intentionality, it takes insight, it takes some commitment to personal growth for managers to get their heads around this. You've probably had this experience, Ethan, when we're training managers. There's a lot of managers we work with who've never really considered this concept. They just haven't thought about the fact that there is this felt power differential between them and their employees. And that if they don't do something to mitigate that, it's going to get in the way. And so I just just a shout out to managers spending some time on this concept, right? And to dig in, to do some self-reflection, to look at their behaviors, because this really matters.
Yeah. I totally agree. We're on the same page with that. There's a self-reflection piece. And as I've said before on this podcast, awareness is kind of the first step. And you can't skip that stage. It's working on your blind spots. Where am I at with this power differential?
Yeah. And get to this sometimes, and this is really ironic, right? I mean, the people who can tell you, the people that are the experts on how your power differential is landing are who, right? It's your employees. They're the ones who know. Now, how do you get that information from them? And again, we're not going to spend too much time on this, but that's an important part of self-discovery, is asking for feedback, listening really well. But the irony is, if people are afraid of you, they're probably not going to tell you the truth. And so, that becomes a little bit of a vicious cycle. And it's worth exploring how to have these conversations with your employees so that you can actually learn what's really true, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think in a moment here, we're going to get to talking a little bit more about some key behaviors that a leader could engage in to mitigate the power differential a bit, to create more psychologically safe teams. But real quickly, I just want to give a bit of an acknowledgement to the fact that we're talking about power differential in the context of, a manager or a leader, right? That you have power for all the ways that we mentioned over your employees. But of course, I think we would all acknowledge that there's other power differential dynamics in the workplace and in society, right? There could be power differentials in terms of race, right? In terms of gender. So although a leader needs to pay attention to the power differential, I think everybody on a team would benefit of understanding a bit more about where there might be a power differential and then engaging in the work to mitigate that as much as possible. So I just want to acknowledge that, because it is still an important concept that we hold on to when we talk about the power differential.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because first, we're talking here about organizational authority. So it's a very specific kind of power differential, but there are so many other perceived power differentials in society and the workplace. One of the ways I like to talk about that is where you take the actual organizational power differential, and then you might add some of these other societal factors to that, which can exacerbate the power differential. And that could be a male boss managing female employees, could exacerbate that sense of power differential. White men leading people of color. I worked with, was it 2 years ago? I worked with a 5'0", African-American crew chief who led, I think it was 4 6-foot something tall white guys that were all kind of loud and boisterous. And man, we spent a lot of time, she and I, talking about the fact that, even though she has the organizational power differential, in many ways, she was feeling kind of one down because of some of these other dynamics. And it was really interesting both for her to dig into that, but also to have some really great conversations between her and her team. So there's a lot of things that can contribute or, either add or subtract to that sense of power differential, physical size, loud voice, who uses more airtime in the meetings, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And, we could spend a lot of time talking about this. And the last thing I would say about this power differential in this context, this is based on some conversations I've had with people about this, but sometimes people get caught up on, well, I'm a white guy and I'm not doing anything to exaggerate that. Let's not get caught up on intention. Let's focus more in on perception, because perception reigns all, right? For instance, if there is a perception of a lack of fairness, for instance, whether or not that lack of fairness is real or not, if there's a perception, well, that means there needs to be some action taken at some level.
Yeah. And then on top of everything else, there's just unconscious bias where I might actually be biased, right? And I'm not aware of it. That's why it's called unconscious. And so I might be behaving in a way that isn't fair or isn't giving everyone a fair shake. So boy, lots of stuff we could do on that topic. So yeah, you kind of teed us up toward let's get into some real conscious, intentional things that a manager who, we acknowledge that we have this power differential and we acknowledge that it can be a roadblock. We don't want to get rid of the power differential. We can't and we shouldn't, because it's there for a reason, right? We're going to need to make decisions, or we're going to need to give people feedback. We're going to need to direct and air traffic control, et cetera, et cetera. But what can we do? And let's maybe you and I just kind of parlay these a little bit. What can we do as a manager to create more psychological safety between us and the people that we supervise?
Yeah. So what can a manager do? What can a leader do to help, mitigate that power differential a bit? I mean, one is just be quote unquote safe in terms of just your body language and your tone and your overall kindness. The reality is when you show up as a little bit, angry, even just a little bit, people tend to feel unsafe around anger. So if that's in your tone of voice or just in your body language, people are generally going to feel unsafe around you, especially when there's that power differential.
I want to emphasize that one because, we're not saying it's something, there's anything wrong with being mad. There's nothing wrong with being frustrated. And as team members, we want to be able to show up and be authentic within reason. I'm not talking about blowing up and freaking out, but we want to be able to express what's true for us. But when you also have the power differential, there is much more need and more responsibility for you to think about the way that you're impacting people around you. And as you said, when I have power over you and you can see the frustration on my face and I'm using words that sound really frustrated or angry, you are definitely going to have this need to protect yourself and go into fight or flight or freeze or fawn.
Yep, agree. And maybe we just cap that one off by saying, just generally be kind, right? If you generally remember that people want to be treated like you want to be treated, and that we all respond positively to general kindness, I mean, that's going to go a long ways. And so I was told by a friend the other day, just in a passing comment, be a little bit kinder than necessary today. And I love that. If we could all just remember to be a little bit kinder than necessary today, it's going to be a beautiful thing.
Ooh, I love that. I might grab that for my mornings. That's good. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, what else? What are some other ways that a leader can create psychological safety? Of course, we're talking within the context of mitigating the power differential.
Probably for me, one of the most important ones is any version of of practicing humility, of demonstrating humility, you think about this, it's a direct balance to the power differential. When you have control, you have power, you have the ability to make decisions, you can lead, but we balance that out with the message that says, I am fallible. I'm not perfect. In fact, specifically right here, I messed up. I apologize for that. I really wish I would have asked your opinions before I made that decision, everyone. That was my bad. I'm going to do better next time. I don't understand. You understand these things better than I do. Would you help me with this? Any version of showing up with humility is, I think, a direct balance to the power differential.
Totally agree. Of course, the other key point here with practicing humility and acknowledging your own fallibility is you're also modeling that for other people on the team, which is actually the case for probably all these things that we're talking about,
Yes.
at least most of them, right? You're modeling that for other people.
Yes.
And generally, whether, you're a leader or not, when you see somebody else showing humility, owning up to mistakes, acknowledging where they misstepped, acknowledging that somebody else might be more knowledgeable or better at this than you are, that tends to get us to be vulnerable as well. Because we see that you recognize yourself as fallible, and I have now permission to do the same. And that's how you create a culture of psychological safety in your team. So I just wanted to nod my head towards that before we move on.
Yeah, I want to head nod toward your head nod on this one, and just case in point, for many years I've been working with a CEO who came into a group, an executive team that was pretty defended, and meaning they were not authentic with one another, they were not very vulnerable. They had previously had a CEO that they were frankly a little afraid of, and boy, she modeled exactly what we're talking about here. She told them her weaknesses and the areas where she did not feel strong in the work. She asked for their help. There were times she was discouraged, and she would tell them that. She admitted mistakes, and she just showed up as herself. I mean, she was so authentic, weaknesses and all. And I watched this group probably in a matter of 8 months, I'm going to say. It's almost like the ice melted in this group. What you just said, I saw happen. I saw them see what she was doing and what she was bringing to the table, and they felt safe to do the same thing, and they started being vulnerable, and it changed the whole culture of that group.
I love that. Yeah, it sounds like she provided, or at least created, the conditions for freedom at some level. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, here's another one. How about just making kind of disagreeing and raising concerns part of the process in your day-to-day management, right? Not the exception, right? And there's simple, practical ways to do that, right? There is just asking people for feedback. Here's what I'm thinking as far as a decision goes, or something like that. I would want to know if anybody disagrees with that, like honestly, or some of it's just in your language in a day-to-day. Hey, if you do have a concern about this, I do actually want you to come talk to me. Or maybe it's being more direct with that. Hey, what concerns do you have with this? Right? And keeping that more of an open-ended question. What concerns do you have with this? What might you disagree with on this decision or this approach? And by the way, there is some nuance there. If you say, hey, does anybody disagree with this? That's easier for people to nod their head and say no. Or you could ask that, hey, what do you disagree with about this? You're basically inviting them to disagree, right? And you're also creating the expectation that I might not be right about this. I want to know why I'm not right.
Yes. I want to dig into this one a little more, because this is really key. And by the way, you brought this to me actually about a year ago, this idea. And I love it. I've used it ever since with some of my groups, even super direct sometimes, like saying things like, all right, it looks like we're heading down this direction, right? We're moving toward this decision. Let's stop right now. Let's talk about all the reasons we shouldn't do this. Let's not just jump on the bandwagon and get excited and go for it. Now, and we might end up going here. It's great. I kind of hope we do. But you know what? Let's be careful. Let's go back and look at all the downsides, right? All the reasons this would be a bad idea.
Yeah, I love that. I've heard that be called kind of negative visualization, yes. Right? And this refers back to something I was mentioning in the last episode, which is you can create specific processes or forums for feedback and raising concerns and disagreeing, right? You could actually have a meeting, say there's a key decision on a project that you're looking to make, and you're saying, hey, this meeting, by the way, come prepared to try to poke as many holes in this as possible, yes. Right? I really want to make sure we're looking at this from every angle, right? So it's an actual specific set aside process. And I've seen that be really powerful. Obviously, make that part of your day-to-day language as well. But, if there's a big thing that you really need people's feedback on, create that space for that.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And let me just go further. So you can also, in a general way, be the manager who says, and not when we're talking about a specific decision, but just say in general, and don't say that's just one time, hey, I do not want a team of people that are going to just be yes men. I do not want a team of people that are going to just agree. In fact, I need you all to be willing and commit yourselves to pushing back, to, disagreeing when you disagree. That's what makes us a better team. So I think being really intentional and asking for that as the manager is a really wonderful way to approach this area.
Yeah. And I like what you alluded to there of kind of giving the why behind this, right? I think it's one thing to say, hey, I want you all to speak up if you have concerns, and I'm going to ask about those, but to say, let's ground us all in the reason why this is what we want to do to have a really healthy and successful team here. Yes. That's how we're going to get to better decisions, right? If we all contribute to thinking about this and raising concerns, we're just going to perform better. And I think once people get that, it makes it easier to feel safe to disagree because we've painted the context for it.
Yes. And you know what is one of the fastest way to ruin and undo all the good stuff we just said? I mean, let's say you've done everything you just described, everything I've just described. We've made disagreeing, we've been intentional, blah, blah. The fastest way to ruin it is as soon as someone tests you on this, right? As soon as they push back and they disagree, and then you get defensive, right? And you just relationally, with your body language, with your tone of voice, in a sense, you punish them for disagreeing, as opposed to, and Ethan, this is another thing you taught me, saying right there in the moment, hey, I am really glad you said that. Or, hey, before we go on, thank you so much for pointing out this, your opinion here, or this disagreement. We need this. This is great.
Yeah. You're rewarding them in real time for disagreeing. Good. Well, I'm sure we could keep riffing off this one for the rest of the show and the rest of the season. But what else do you have for me here, or have for us?
Yeah, I'll do one on, I'll mention, this is a broader topic and we have a podcast or more than one on this one, but really asking people's opinions before you decide, and being willing to trust the wisdom of the group. And I don't mean every decision. And we're not advocating that managers or leaders never make a decision on their own. But in general, you use the wisdom of the group. You say to people, look, I have to make this decision about this, and I need your help. I need your input. Or, hey, we need to make this decision together. And you let go of the power in that sense as the sole decision maker. So basically just including people in decisions, asking their opinions, really listening to their input. And by listening, I don't just mean listening in the moment, but considering their input and incorporating their input into your final decision.
Yeah. And that last point there, I think, is key, which is something you referred to in the last piece we talked on, which is obviously words matter. We would all agree that words matter, but behaviors and actions matter even more, right? And so it's not just asking for input and decisions, but it's listening and incorporating them. Again, something we've talked about many times here. It's just being appreciative, giving affirmations, saying thank you, acknowledging the good stuff. You talked about last episode that we all have this kind of relational bank account with people, right? And we're going to take withdrawals. We're going to mess up. We're going to forget to follow up on something. We're going to give feedback in a way that maybe wasn't the best way to do it. And so make sure you're making deposits into that bank account, right? Calling out the good work when you see it, right? And by the way, this is probably intuitive for everybody here, but now there's research behind it. One of the largest factors for team motivation is positive feedback, right? And I think there's a lot of people that get caught up on the constructive feedback, and that's how we create a positive culture. That's important, but one of the top things is the positive feedback. People knowing that they're doing a good work, people knowing that people see their good work, people being recognized that they're actually contributing to this, right? That increases the motivation and the psychological safety.
Yeah. And think about a time when you, and I'm saying this to you, Ethan, and to our listeners, a time when you have had a boss, a supervisor, a manager, and you truly believed that they liked you. You believed that they appreciated you for who you were. They appreciated your ideas. A time when you felt truly in your body, even you felt appreciated by this person.
I absolutely have. I mean, not only with you, of course, but I've had some other really great past managers, right? And sometimes it was just a little thing of like getting a sticky note left on my desk that said, hey, I saw all that work you did yesterday, right? You really picked up the slack and I appreciate that, right? That's all I needed, right? I did it. There wasn't some reward that I got or a bonus that I got, but that was enough to say, okay, people saw that my work is not kind of going to waste here.
Yeah. And that's not just good management. Let's go back to psychological safety. Why do I feel more safe with someone who treats me that way? Let me throw that to you, Ethan. Why does that make me feel more likely to show up as my true self?
Well, I'm paraphrasing here. There's a quote, I think it was William James, who said, the deepest human craving is the craving to be appreciated.
Yes.
Right. And I think that word craving is pretty intentional there. I mean, at one level, it comes back to the power differential, which is what we're talking about here, right? When someone that has some power over me shows appreciation, I develop a kind of a deep and uncommon sense of trust in them, right? That they actually, it appears that they have my best interest at heart because they're paying attention to the work I'm doing and acknowledging it. Yes. And that breeds trust.
It does. And they see my good, right? They see the good I bring. They see the good in my character. When I believe that, I actually trust the relational bank account more, which means I don't have to be perfect, right? I don't have to walk some really thin line or be on super thin ice, right? They see me, including all my good, which means I can probably not be perfect tomorrow or at that meeting or in that decision, and I'm going to be okay with you, right?
Yeah, totally true. And last thing I'll say on this one is that if I get the impression that my manager, cares about me, they appreciate me and they like me, right? That's going to develop a sense of trust. I would even go as far as to say, you don't necessarily have to like a person to show them appreciation. And I think that's hopefully you do like the people you work with and hopefully you develop a relationship where you get to understand them and know them, which tends to allow us to really actually like a person, right? Even if we don't always agree with them, but don't start with, I have to like that person first before I'm going to give some appreciation. Obvious, but I'm going to say that.
No, it's not obvious. And I think that's important. And man, this is like the fourth thing we could do a whole podcast on. But let me just say, while I don't have to personally like everyone I supervise to be an effective manager and to, show appreciation, all those good things, in a sense, the employee has to have the sense that I like them, right? And that's different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the interpretation that they like you, or maybe if it's easier for people to wrap their heads around that there's an impression that you care about them.
Yes.
Right.
Actually, even a better word for it. Yep. Well, hey, let's do a couple more. Managers, leaders, bosses, you have to listen in a way that the other person truly feels heard. And we are not going to take any more time, right, Ethan, on this one? Let's not get into the specific skills.
We will link to the episode we did on listening that shows care and respect. And I will approach the next one in a similar vein, which is give feedback in a way that keeps you connected relationally with your people. And we've done episodes on that. We talked about that a bit on last episode. I will link to those episodes of the show notes as well about how to give feedback in a way that's effective and keeps you connected relationally. But obviously, as a manager, as a leader, it is your job to be able to give feedback. And we talked about the positive feedback. That's really important. But when you need to give constructive feedback, how do you do that in a way that lowers their defenses, right? Because they will get defensive when they get feedback. It's human nature. And part of this is just making sure that we're giving feedback on the behavior or the task or the project and not on the person's character or their intentions, which is easy to slip into sometimes.
I'll just agree with you. Yeah, it is very important because it is part of our job as managers to give that feedback. Some managers, because they're so afraid of harming the psychological safety, they won't give feedback at all, which leads to a whole other host of problems. I think others might underappreciate the fear that is involved in the employee's part when they're getting feedback from a person with a power differential, and they don't do what you just said, which is find ways to give that feedback in a way that helps you stay connected, that helps lower the defenses. Let's just say, we have at least one or more podcasts on that people can go back to and listen.
And how about the final one? Why don't you take it?
Well, I guess it's sort of parallel to the one you just mentioned. It's a manager who really does want feedback, or at least is willing to ask for feedback about them. I don't mean just input on decisions. I mean, what would you like to see more of or less of from me as a manager, right? What are some areas that I could improve as a manager? Or, this project that we just completed and all the decisions that went into that and all the meetings that went into that, what would you do differently? What would you have done differently if you were me? What can you tell me about the way I'm showing up that would help me grow and improve as a manager, right? It's the manager who's willing to ask for feedback, who then receives that feedback very graciously and in no way relationally or psychologically punishes that person for giving that feedback. I think that's a really important piece.
Yeah, I think you covered that one pretty well. Again, I'll link to another episode in the show notes that may be relevant for this one, which is about receiving feedback non-defensively. But just to highlight, I think a key point that you said there, it's not just asking for feedback on decisions. I mean, that's a part of it, but it's asking for feedback on how am I showing up as a leader and a manager? And
a couple of quick examples of that. Even let's say we're finished with a review cycle, right? Meaning I've done your annual review, and then next time we get together, I might say, hey, doing reviews is awkward. It's hard. How'd it go? As far as what would you have liked to have seen me do differently? What worked? I mean, you can take those sort of specific manager activities and occasionally just jump in and ask, how could I improve in this area? And I tell you what, when you do that as my manager and you ask me those kinds of questions, the subtext is you actually, number one, you're not perfect. You're also telling me that you're open and that it's safe for me to give you feedback. You're just making it much less likely that I have to hide or that I have to keep things to myself.
Absolutely. And of course, what couples with asking for feedback, as we mentioned, is being able to receive that non-defensively as well. Some of the most heartbreaking situations is a manager that's totally on board with asking for feedback and they do it a ton. And then when someone gives it to them, they punish them by getting defensive.
Yes.
And all of a sudden they're wondering why people aren't giving them feedback anymore. Well, let me tell you why.
Okay.
So those we just gave you eight different ways that a leader could work to mitigate the power differential, but really to build psychological safety on their team.
Right.
And as I mentioned before, you're building psychological safety by practicing these behaviors, and you're also modeling them for the rest of the team.
Yeah, this is great. There's many others, but I would encourage our listeners to maybe choose from among the ones we've shared. If you're a leader, if you're a manager, to maybe take 2 or 3 of these, maybe just one or two, and kind of put it on your radar for the next amount of time, right? For the next couple of weeks, and find some opportunities to practice that specific behavior.
Yeah, and I love taking a few at a time or one at a time. If everything's your priority, then nothing is, right? It tends to be hard for us to focus in on a whole bunch of things we want to improve at once. And so play the long game, right? Start with a few things, get good at those, add some more layers as you go. And at the same time, I think it still is important to keep all these things on your radar, even if they're kind of in the background, but have specific ones that you're intentionally focused on right now. Well, we are kind of winding down to the end of this episode. If you don't mind, Dad, I just want to leave the audience here with kind of 3 steps or actions that teams and leaders can take right now, really, to start working on their psychological safety on their teams. All the things we just talked about, those are all actions at some level. So do those, but some high level actions here. 1, just take some intentional time to get to know each other. And I'm being intentional about the word intentional, right? Especially in the remote and hybrid environment. Right? You're not necessarily running into each other where we used to run into each other, wherever that was, the hallways, the bathroom, I don't know, but put aside time.
Yeah. And what you're suggesting, I think a lot of groups sort of out of hand, a lot of leaders sort of out of hand reject this or don't even consider it because it's, a waste of time. It's not getting down to business, but it's really hard to create psychological safety in a group if you're not spending time learning who each other is. Right. And so, yeah, I would recommend, whether it's short periods of time within meetings for people to just share who they are, maybe preloaded some icebreaker questions or open discussion. So a little bit of loose time maybe in meetings. I would recommend absolutely for any group that wants to be a high functioning group that they find strategic times throughout the year to just be together, not doing work or doing more meta work on the functioning of the team itself. Right. So spending time working on, common commitments like we've talked about before, those kinds of activities, just social activities together, anything like that is going to help a team develop their psychological safety because it's how, it's based on getting to know and appreciate each other.
Yeah, love it. And one thing I love to engage in with groups is getting people to talk a little bit about the challenges that they've, faced in life or some of the factors that might have kind of shaped them into who they are today. And I always do that with the caveat of, hey, you don't have to share your biggest challenge or anything like that. But, what is a challenge that you all have faced? And what I see in that is people being able to recognize who that person is, right? By understanding the challenges that people face, you get a sense of why that person does what they do, right? Or why they react in certain ways in situation. And you really develop a deep sense of trust when we're showing that we all face challenges.
Oh yeah, I've seen work relationships dramatically improved just by getting an opportunity to hear about their struggles in life. Like suddenly you see that person more as a real human with real struggles and real hurts, and your empathy grows for that person, and your understanding and your grace grows for that person. I think it's vital.
Agreed. And another suggestion I have here is to kind of share their, behavioral profiles and their growth opportunities. So our workshop, of course, is we do behavioral styles, which is about kind of, we all have a different style in terms of how we show up to others. And I think one of the reasons that this is really beneficial for a team in building psychological safety is because of this concept this psychologists call the fundamental attribution error, which is an error we all make if we're not careful, which is, in so many words, the tendency of human beings to attribute, the negative behaviors of others to their intentions while attributing our own negative behaviors to environmental factors, right? So, if you show up a little bit grumpy or curt today, it's, well, because you're kind of a grumpy person, right? Or you're trying to make us all feel bad. Right. But if I show up a little bit grumpy today, well, that's because I had a really hard morning at home with my family and I have these work deadlines that are breathing down my neck. So how else would anybody react in this situation? Right. And I think when we engage in a process of understanding our behavioral styles, whether that's through Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, and there's a lot of them out there, we get to understand, oh, that's just that person's processing style or the communication style. Or, oh, now I understand their tension points, or I understand their reaction to stress a little bit better. And so that, again, as you understand people better and how they show up to others, we're able to extend more grace and even better, help kind of give the other people what they need in conversation and relationship.
That's really good. And that's the kind of stuff we do with groups and try to help them get to that, sharing their profiles, sharing their growth edges from those profiles, what they're going to be working on based on their profiles. I think that's great. Hey, I want to be super authentic with you because I feel psychologically safe with you. I have to go to the bathroom more than I've probably had to go for months right now. And so I really think we should just maybe end this episode.
All right. Well, that sounds like an awkward place to end it. So we will end it right there. Folks, thanks for listening in. If the spirit moves you, then please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That actually helps other people find us. Thank you kindly and peace out.
Thanks, everybody.